talking about jokes and cultural differences and reactions to them. Did I ever tell you about Mr. Penis?
Excuse me? Excuse me?
What?
That's all we have time for today. I'm not sure. Explain to me in what culture this is okay.
Well, this is the story of Mr. Penis in Mexico.
I see.
Yeah, where I'm standing in front of a group of people in
Would
Mexico
he be
City.
Senior Penis there?
If you were making the mistake that I was making, yes.
Well, you've seen one penis, you've seen them all. So there we go.
So,
Sorry.
so I'm making a
Just
presentation
an
in
example
Mexico
of
City,
non-humor. Right?
and there's a fellow in the room. His name is Mr. Pena.
Okay.
Okay, and my Spanish is lacking, and so some people are commenting. Mr. Pena, Senor Pena, has his hand is up. He wants to comment about something that I was speaking about, and I go, Senor Pena.
Mm.
The room completely falls apart. Completely falls apart. And of course, I'm beginning to figure out what maybe I said that was so funny.
Yeah, yeah.
And then once it dawns on me and I realized what had happened, well, this was a perfect opportunity for self-deprecation.
Right, okay.
Right?
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And so I made some sort of comment about the fact that I've been trying to learn Spanish, but obviously not well enough. And and he was fine, and everyone else was fine about it. But that for me was definitely a learning experience.
Sure.
Right?
What inevitably seems to happen in something along those lines where something gets misspoken or something like that, and it's about an individual who's there. So often it's also, and I don't know anything about the poor gentleman, but maybe it was very appropriate, and that's why I got such a big laugh. Maybe
there may have been many other reasons why I got a laugh, but
as opposed to the junior high response,
I kind of figured out pretty quickly what had happened,
right.
from the context of the room.
Could have been some of both too.
Could we say as the root of the word? Actually, yes.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Precisely.
We'll let that lie right there. Yeah, thank you.
But language really does present this challenge and also an opportunity for humor that we may not have been aware of.
Right.
And if the person isn't unaware of it, that may be problematic, but it could also be part of the humor. I remember one time I was in New York, actually, and doing a presentation at a Dutch company. And there was a fellow there with a heavy Dutch accent. And interestingly, the traditional New York City accent of standing on the corner of Toity and Toid
right.
is actually a derivative of the Dutch accent because
early Dutch,
right?
Colony,
and early Dutch colony. And anyway, this fellow, being Dutch, was speaking English with a Dutch accent, and one of the things that he commented on was that he had to learn in his work here in the States that the way things got interpreted was not necessarily the way he meant them. At one point, he was speaking with his colleagues, the Americans, and he said that he hated disorganization. And they were shocked to hear someone admit that he worked for the company and just come out and say he hated disorganization.
Right.
What he was saying was truly he hated disorganization,
right.
not this organization with a Dutch accent.
Yeah.
And it would have been interesting to be able to interpret what he was saying, because if you became aware of one of the issues that Americans have with Dutch culture is that Dutch communication patterns are very direct, to the point where if they say something that might cause offense in an American context, it's merely plain speaking. The intent was not to cause an offense, but the intent was simply to say what needed to be said.
Which is interesting that it makes problems in a culture such as the U.S. where we consider ourselves plain speaking.
But we're not nearly as plain speaking as the Dutch.
No.
And if there was any plain speaking tradition in the U.S., it came from where the Dutch were when they were here. Mm-hmm. It didn't come from the Midwest or certainly from the American South.
Right.
So this tradition of this phenomenon of plain speaking to the point of saying what needs to be said, even if it's unpleasant, got misunderstood through dialect, where the Americans who learned about Dutch behavior assumed that he was saying something in a very plain speaking way,
Right.
that he hated this organization.
Well, quite bold of him.
But in fact, he wasn't. He was just speaking about the fact that he didn't like things when they weren't organized.
Right. Okay. Yeah. All right.
The complexities of humor and language
Yes. Yes.
and culture, because we're here talking about oops, your culture's showing.
I guess we all hate disorganization on some level, Dean Foster.
Oh, okay.
What? No, I'm not saying I hate Dean Foster. Is that what you were taking out of that?
Yes.
I would never say that on the air.
I see.
Oh, hi, Dean.
And I'm a highly organized person, so you couldn't
Oh, extremely organized.
you couldn't hate that.
Yes.
Right?
Well, no. Is he looking at me now?
No.
Okay, good.
okay.
Thank you.
And you are Tom Peterson.
Last I checked, that's what's stitched inside my underwear. Uh-huh.
Wait a minute.
Oh,
It's like I'm still going to camp in the summer or something.
okay.
I'm 127 years
Do
old.
not need to visualize.
Now I need to, so I can check the band of my underwear to find out what my name is.
Thank you, Mr. Pena.
It's a different end of the age bracket. Yes, really. Excuse me, or thank you. I'm not sure which. Something in there. Anyway, for those of you
So
who,
you're Tom Peterson.
I am Tom Peterson. You're Dean Foster, and we've got Torin, our producer here.
Hello.
And so good to have you in studio. We're all in
Thank
studio.
you. We are.
And,
We're having a good time today because we're talking about humor and
it's fun.
Enjoy.
joy.
Joy.
And I'm interested in communal expressions of joy. I think in particular, which obviously there's those can be the same as individual expressions. But and we talked about celebrations and festivals around death, particularly ones that are celebrating life. I'm curious to
The
know
opposite,
what are similarities and differences there, right?
And the interesting thing is that, as we spoke about, the funeral celebrations are still celebrations, even though we're grieving about somebody who's left us. And then the opposite side of that coin is the wedding. That's what I think of, and wedding celebrations around the world where we're celebrating the start of life and the joy around that. So it's two sides of the same coin. Right?
But is it, or is it just us turning to joy in a very similar way, but for different causes? I'm just wondering. I'd like to throw a premise out here between humor and joy. I think that and maybe almost between the humanity overall and individual cultures is that my premise is that humanity has a shared sense of humor, but cultures tweak it to their particular needs and wants.
Right.
Now, that may be what culture does with just about everything. But I think it may be a little more, or maybe not more, but it's certainly obvious with joy and especially in humor.
So we all have the same needs, more or less. We all have the same goals, more or less. But how we achieve them is going to be different. And that's where culture comes in. Culture gives us different paths to achieving joy, to achieving, Maslow's, 7 layers of needs, hierarchy of needs. Right. So we all share, that's the universal aspect of us.
Right.
We all share those hierarchy of needs, but how we achieve them is culturally different.
Okay. So let's achieve.
If one of those needs is joy,
yeah,
happiness, then there are many paths to it.
Sure.
And different cultures emphasize different paths.
Yes. But is it true, and Dean Foster, is it true in your expert cultural opinion that all cultures have some sense of moving toward joy and pathway toward joy, or believe they do?
Believe they do.
Okay.
Yes, I think it is something. It's an aspect of a universal aspect of humanity.
And would it be true also to say that some cultures share that consistently and in an overall, and others splinter into different ways they do it? Much like religion?
Yeah, I think we all splinter.
Yeah.
I think they all do.
Okay.
Yes, yes. Some more or less. Look, I mean, there are some that really celebrate this whole aspect of joy much more profoundly. Like Bhutan, for example, I think celebrates the fact that happiness, and they refer to it as happiness, not joy, but happiness, is a profound fundamental value in that country, and that the religious tradition, which is very, very profoundly Buddhist, plays right into that idea that if we follow the Buddhist ideas, it's going to lead us to a profound sense of happiness. And the idea of happiness in Bhutan goes much deeper than just joy, or just happiness as we might know it in the U.S. It is profound happiness. It is aggressive and daily, and this should be a level of a way of living that everyone should have access to and be able to achieve. And it's right there in your face everywhere in Bhutan. This issue of happiness. The Danish issue of now my Danish is as bad as my Spanish, so I'll say of hygge, where one can live a contented life, not maybe happy, but contented with simple pleasures. Mm-hmm. I guess it could relate to the term simple pleasures. So yeah, I think all cultures have some notion of happiness, but many cultures place a great emphasis on this and on their path to it. And I think other cultures say it's not that critical. And it's up to every individual to figure out their own way to do it.
All right.
How does that manifest itself? I'm curious to know in, I guess to use your examples, in either Denmark or Bhutan then, would you say?
I think, interestingly, there's a relationship between the importance of happiness and the notion of individualism or communalism. And there seems to be a recognition in countries that emphasize this idea of happiness profoundly, that there's a recognition that the only way we're going to achieve this is if we achieve it communally. And in cultures that talk about happiness, like in the U.S., and again, in its day when it was encoded into the Declaration of Independence, that was a pretty revolutionary statement. But in reality, as it's played out, we're a very individualist culture. And I think the way to it is left up to each individual. And if they don't necessarily want to go there, they don't have to.
Would you say, because I'm thinking here in the U.S. where we are recording this, there are expressions of sort of communal joy with, as we referenced earlier, like weddings, right, or graduation ceremonies or things like that. That sort of come up here and there, right? Aren't necessarily part of daily life.
There's special events,
right? They're special events,
as opposed to.
So I'm curious.
Things we
do you see
daily.
More? Are there more sort of like societal communal events like that in like Denmark or Bhutan, or are you talking more within the family unit?
I think I'm talking about how we relate with each other on a day-to-day basis, independent of getting married, having a wedding, having a funeral, independent of these special events, based on our role in society, who we are and what we do, how we achieve a level of happiness, if it's important to the society or not, on a daily basis. So independent of special events and now, are there special events that celebrate different aspects of life in these cultures? Yes, definitely. Sure. But I think there's an emphasis to this on a daily basis that doesn't exist necessarily in other places.
And so with special events, do you is there more of a focus on? Is there more of an emphasis on bringing about joy or expressing joy communally in those events, would you say?
I think so.
Okay.
I think so. Yeah. You know, like one of the most joyous events I can think of is that I've ever experienced, and I may be speaking subjectively, that is simply something for me that I was just overwhelmed by is, you know, Carnival in Brazil.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, that ostensibly it started as a religious holiday and was much more somber than it is today. Clearly, it is celebration for celebration's sake. It is celebration for being able to turn everything upside down and make believe whatever you want to make believe, and that should be celebrated.
That's a sense of joy.
Yes, you know, and it's a remarkable experience, and anybody who has the opportunity, I think, should definitely, appreciate it, because it is a celebration of joy. It's not celebrating something else that is joyous.
Right.
It's not celebrating something else that might bring you to joy. It is simply a celebration. And I know there's lots of religious connotations, and there'll be individuals who will say, no, there are other pieces to it. But really, for the most part, for most participants, it's simply a celebration of joy. That's it.
Yeah, that makes me think of Mardi Gras as well in New Orleans.
That's right.
Right, where you have just celebration on the street.
Exactly.
And even generally, you know, so it's within the U.S., there are obviously quite a bit of cultural differences within the U.S., right? And so that seems like an example, sort of, it's, to me anyway, akin to Carnival, where you have just jazz in the streets and joy kind of overflowing in the streets, which that seems unique.
Yeah.
And those celebrations are not are in many different parts of the world that go along with that. There's Carnival in some aspect in several different cultures.
Well, the roots
of
of Carnival are pretty much the same, coming out of the Roman Catholic tradition,
Right.
and coming out of Lent. It's a celebration before we go into this very
the big blast before you go into
period of sacrifice.
Yes.
But and so it got enacted in different cultures in different ways. And in Venice, in we have the remains in Venice, the Carnival of Venice, of how Carnival was celebrated in Italian cultures in the past, and of course Mardi Gras and Carnival in Latin America, in Hispanic Latin America, but and Portuguese Latin America mainly, but. So you have Carnival in many different places, celebrated differently. I just can't think of any of them that are simply and merely independent of their roots. Such a celebration of joy.
Sure.
As the one in Rio.
In a smaller sense.
And Bahia, Brazil as well.
There is I'm going to say in a smaller sense only in the idea of the size of the celebration, but it triggered because you're talking about Mardi Gras and Carnival and all coming at a time to give a big last blast before you're going into a period of sacrifice. In the Middle East, they go into a period of sacrifice, and they, if I'm not mistaken, and Torin, you spent 2 years in the Middle East living there, but they have a big blast of sorts before they go into it, right? And then another as they come out.
After, so theirs
is all after.
Yeah, so there's I think you're referring to Ramadan. Yes,
Ramadan.
So there's a month of fasting and withholding in other ways as well. And then yes, at the end is the Eid al-Fitr, which you're breaking the fast.
Break fast.
And so the Eid is festival. So it's a festival where you all come together and break the fast, and it's very, very joyous because we did it.
Yeah.
Well, there's an interesting relationship in the words. You know, festival, fete. Holiday, holy day.
Yes.
There's that connects the roots of many of the things the celebrations of joy that we do today, which in many cases are just very secular. That we've lost the religious traditions that they came from, but they did all come from these religious traditions, and Ramadan is still a religious holiday, and the festival or the feast, because the word festival comes from feast, usually happens right before a period of sacrifice or a period after sacrifice. So there is this really very strong connection to religious roots for all festivals that seem to have a joyous element to them.
But that is interesting too in terms of the universality, right? Where it's right, as you're saying, we anticipate a sacrifice or we've accomplished that sacrifice together. That seems very human.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah, very human. To me, it seems sort of like that in the celebration of the cultures, which is what the podcast is about. We're celebrating the differences in the cultures, not pointing fingers at differences in cultures, and at the same time should also be looking at, to me, the world should be looking at the things we share as humans, and we don't do enough of that. We look more at well, this is what I do kind of aspect. Hold on, I got to get down off my soapbox. Hang on a second here. Okay.
But we already kicked you off.
Oh,
I'm
thank you.
surprised you were able to take the mic up with you. That was
Yeah,
impressive.
Yeah. Got a long cord on it.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Anyway, it was. I still think that because there are so many things. I mean, you go back to the religious roots of this, but the roots of the religious aspect of many of these things go back to celebrations long before religion was a formal aspect in humankind, and it was going back to the pagans and even beyond them to celebrations because it's the shortest day of the year. You're losing the sun, and so now we're not going to have it for 6 months. So we got to do stuff and kind of celebrate. And it's very dark right now, so let's lighten the place up as much as we can and do things to get us through this. And when does that come? Oh, I don't know. It comes like at the end of what is now our calendar says, the end of November through much of the early part of the new year.
Right, when it's cold, and so you need to infuse some joy in there.
Kind of a human reaction trying to find joy out of what isn't very fun anymore. And then in doing the opposite, the other direction as well, celebrating in the middle of all of it all, when you've got these wonderful days of warmth and sunshine. And so on, whether that's in the northern hemisphere or the southern hemisphere, you're going to find ancient cultures of a sort, even just tribal cultures, who we're doing those things, and we've kind of grabbed them and run with them in some form. It's why we have an Easter bunny. Huh?
Who lays chocolate eggs?
Chocolate eggs. Hey, if you're going to lay eggs, chocolate ones are pretty
Well,
good.
are we looking for logic here? Because
No,
then don't turn to religion.
We skated out of logic a while ago.
But is the reason for it all to create
intrinsically
joy?
human response to joy.
Yes.
Yeah.
And to celebrating either the end or the beginning of a period of sacrifice, so that we can get either squeeze the last bit of joy out of the moment or celebrate the fact that we've been victorious in some form or another.
Or yes, and make the food last that we grew, killed, harvested, whatever we did to it to gather it. Now we know at some point we're going to have less food and it's going to dwindle down to a few, and then they will start to get more again. But for now, we got to make some sort of joyful thing so that we can celebrate until we have to go through all of this. Kind of sounds like the other stuff we're talking about.
Yeah. And feasting also, feast, festival, holiday.
Yeah.
The feasting aspect of this prior to a period of sacrifice was also one where it enabled you to literally fatten up to see yourself through a period that was going to be slim.
Right.
And so there was even a biological rationale to having the feast. And then, of course, the feast was an opportunity for communal celebration.
Right. In the time period that we're doing this podcast, we are in the holidays in the United States, the holidays of Thanksgiving, and then ahead of us is varieties of holidays that will be coming up with Hanukkah and Christmas and New Year's and so on.
I just wanted to add, this made me think in terms of the title Thanksgiving, giving thanks. Big part of a big expression of joy can be expressing gratitude, and receiving gratitude. So in terms of birthdays, something I just thought of, and I don't remember if I may have mentioned this before. I don't. If I have, oh well, but I'm mentioning it again. In terms of
we never repeat information.
no, we never ever
No,
repeat anything. In terms of differences in how birthdays are celebrated, birthdays overall always I always struggle a little bit with the celebration of birthdays, just in terms of you were born, congratulations, right? In terms of celebrations of life. And here in the U.S., it is, the expectation is that others will celebrate your life on your birthday, right? We talked about Jordan, Mike. So we talked about me living in the Middle East. I lived in Jordan specifically for 2 years with the Peace Corps. And in Jordan, it's the inverse. In Jordan, rather than expecting others to celebrate you, you celebrate others.
And that, I think, is more common, actually, than...
Okay.
More common in other cultures around the world, is
yes,
that what you're saying?
Than for you to be the one celebrate, for them to be celebrating you, you celebrate for everyone else.
I loved that. Felt much more comfortable for me.
On your birthday, you do this.
So
Okay.
on my birthday, I would and this is what everyone I worked in a school, I was teaching, and so every teacher, when it was their birthday, they would come into school with chocolates, and they made sure they had enough chocolates for everyone. They would go all around and pass out the chocolates, and so I did that as well, and yeah, I really liked that.
Yeah, and in fact, one of the issues that sometimes comes up when Americans are working in continental Europe is that they're surprised that when you go into the office in Europe and it's your birthday, you're expected to then provide treats for everybody in celebration of your birthday.
That makes a whole lot of sense, I think.
Mm-hmm.
It
think so.
doesn't it?
Well, I think any of it makes sense.
But, right,
it's just the cultural context in which it occurs.
Right.
Sure.
Because
sure.
yeah, right. At first it was like, oh, huh. And then right, the more I thought about it and just spend time, like, well, I actually I would like to bring that back to the U.S. But it doesn't really. That didn't happen.
It didn't happen here. Maybe it didn't happen here because we were a revolutionary society, and so anything that was European, i.e., British but still European, was rejected, and so they did the opposite. Maybe that is a path that's occurred, for so many other things in the U.S. That'd be interesting to track it and see. But your comment about birthdays and celebrations, birthdays as a celebration of life, even that varies culture by culture. How we celebrate the birthdays are completely different. I think of many Asian cultures. Korea, I think, is one of them. Japan, others, where the tradition, although they've taken a lot of Western traditions now, but the tradition was you don't count somebody as being born until their, I think, their 5th birthday, because so many children would die in the past. They never made it. In many African cultures, we're not tracking birthdays until it's obvious that you will survive. Right. And birthday, and that counts as your first birthday, or in some other cultures, it's after you've lived the first year, not it's at the beginning of the first year. Right. So, and then you stop counting, I think, traditionally in Korea when someone reaches the age of 65. Then they don't count birthdays after that. Now, this is traditional, of course, and it's changed dramatically since then, but it's still an older tradition in Korea.
I wonder if that also reflects itself into the reason why, for instance, the after 1 year, in Western cultures anyway, or at least in the United States, we celebrate the first birthday as a celebration of having survived the year. Because we're not talking about just being alive, although in essence, I guess we are, but we do it. Whatever number you've got, you've already lived those numbers of years. And so, but to what you were just saying, the idea, because in the United States, a lot of children, 100 years ago, a lot of children were still dying.
And in many cultures around the world, that's still the case.
Still the case. And so you kind of look at it, either delaying it like you're talking about, or at least delaying it that first year, which is a very tenuous one, especially without a lot of the medical advances that have taken place in the last 100 years. So it kind of makes it a little more sense, because I've heard people speak in this country about, well, you've actually lived that long and blah, 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 like it's a mathematical error or something, that you're not really that old. It's because you've already lived that long. Okay, yeah, we got it. I understood that right from the beginning. But still, that does kind of answer that. It says, yeah, well, this is why we track it this way, because if you don't, then it was sort of easier, I guess. Easy? Is that the answer? Is this joyous? I mean, I think it is. We're celebrating life, right?
Do you mean this conversation or?
Or
yeah,
the birthday.
all of the above.
Oh, okay.
All of the above.
I think so.
I think, and I think it leads us to another subject which we can discuss in a future podcast, and which opens up the door, I believe, to kind of, as you were addressing age and birthdays in the Asian countries, the treatment of the elder members of society as opposed to younger, as opposed to the Western.
As opposed to the mistreatment of elders.
Exactly right.
Society.
And I think we're coming into a time period, and I'm looking at it in Western, in basically Europe and the United States and in those areas, but also Australia and other areas along those lines, where the youth are celebrated so much. And not that the youth won't be celebrated, because they will continue to be. But I think we're looking at a point where it might start to tip the balance a little bit in appreciation of the older generations for a major reason, because of the baby boom that happened after World War II. And there's so many of us who were born in that time period.
You're speaking for yourself.
I am speaking for myself.
Oh, okay.
Because I do happen to fall into that age bracket. I know everybody else in this room is much younger than me, but it's but I think it's something that we can,
and so much more honest than you too.
Much more honest. When what I'm saying is, in a future podcast, I think we can maybe get into the idea that, is this a culturally transitional moment? Also, we talked about some in our last two podcasts on joy and humor. I think we've talked about some transitions of those types of things. And maybe we can look into the transition of this. Is this coming?
Well, there's one of those profound questions that all these podcasts raise all the time, which is, how do cultures change? And do they change? And are we living in a change moment? Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's talk about that.
We will. And you know why? The main reason is that before we even get to that, thank you, Torrin. And Dean Foster, thank you for your wisdom. I'm Tom Peterson.
And I'm Dean Foster.
And you know what? Oops. Your culture's showing. Smell ya.
Okay, listen, the way to get hold of us is oopscultureshow@gmail.com. And our Twitter handle is Oops Culture Show. Whether this is the first episode or the third episode or whatever episode that you've listened to, you should really subscribe. That's the best way to go, really, honestly. I know what I'm talking about. All right, so just subscribe through iTunes or through wherever you get your podcasts from. Subscribe. Thank you.